Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Brabber, and alongside me is Logan Camden, and we've got a bunch of interesting basketball to talk about today because we just had a very fun, exciting weekend in the NBA. How was your weekend, Logan?
It was fantastic, bro. How about yours?
My weekend was good, man. Saw the Oscars last night. Honora, big weekend for Honora. You don't know what I'm talking about, but anybody who listened to the Oscar pod with Jokic Joestar knows. Big fan.
I was just taking souls on the basketball court, man.
That's hard. That's hard, man. You know who else was taking souls on the basketball court, Logan? Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, and the Cleveland Cavaliers, who ended up winning on Friday night what was maybe the game of the year against the Boston Celtics. Now, Boston was down a couple of key guys, Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday, but nevertheless felt like a huge win for the Cavs, especially because they started this one down 25-3 and then came all the way back. After watching that game, Logan, what I think we can pretty confidently say should be the Eastern Conference Finals preview, what were your takeaways? And how good a chance do you think Cleveland has of beating Boston in a 7-game series?
I think they're right there with Boston. Now, I think Boston is just over the top with talent where if they were fully healthy, I don't think I could pick against them. In a lot of ways, I really do feel like Kristaps Porzingis is the X factor in this series, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I would give Cleveland a very good chance against Boston. Like, in no ways do I think this is a gimme in the way that it was last year, right? With Darius Garland struggles, with some of their injuries, with honestly the lack of depth compared to this year. I think the Cavs' depth is even better than last season as well. And this is just a great basketball team. Against Boston, they notched their ninth straight victory. They're now up to 10 straight. Over those last 10 games, they're number one in offensive rating, number 4 in defensive rating, and number 1 in net rating. Specifically, when we're looking at keys and what needs to go right for Cleveland, I'll start defensively for them. I think you have to limit Garland and Mitchell switches onto wings and bigs as much as possible. I think mismatch attacking is Boston's greatest strength as a team. And this team hunts switches every single possession. And a lot of times they can just abuse them, right? If it's Darius Garland, if it's Donovan Mitchell, if it's Ty Jerome. Jaylen Brown can just so easily physically overpower and get to his spots against these guys. A lot of switches on Garland, too. I will say, in this game specifically, I thought there were a few offensive fouls that should have been called from Jaylen Brown on Garland. I thought Garland got hit in the face a few times, like with an elbow that I just thought the refs missed. But Brown's great at attacking mismatches, and so is Jayson Tatum. He can just shoot over the top of them. And, we see a little bit of a contrast. When Tatum's on, he's just unstoppable. He has a little bit of an off night against Denver. But I really trust the wings that Cleveland has in those individual matchups. I trust Strus. I trust DeAndre Hunter. I really trust these bigs when they have to switch onto the wings with Allen and Mobley. So, one, you have to try to limit them as much as possible. But on the inverse of that, the little guys are just going to have to play hard, too. Boston's really good at getting these switches, and I think that smaller wings and guards are going to have to play really hard because these switches are going to be inevitable. And that's a really big part of why I think Kristaps Porzingis is going to be the X factor in this series. Like, he's unstoppable. How great he is in the post now as a player. How he's going to be able to take away some of these shots that Garland and Mitchell have in the mid-range when he's out there. There are some other defensive things, but that's where I want to start. I think that it sounds really basic. Cleveland's smaller guys are going to have to play really hard and fight. I thought you saw Ty Jerome for a little bit in this game in the second quarter. He kept getting switched on Horford and wasn't giving him an inch. But that's where it's going to start. And speeding up Tatum and Jaylen Brown as well. I think applying ball pressure, getting up into their body. Brown would be the guy that I attack too. I know he was really hot and him and Tatum were serving buckets. Certain points in this game, I thought that Jaylen Brown was shooting Cleveland back into this game. And he's the guy that I would play off of, right? Boston doesn't have a whole lot of weak spots. And when I'm talking about attacking mismatches as well, Derek White is really good at attacking mismatches too. He's a jumbo-sized guard. It's a lot easier said than done. Brown is the guy that I think I'm picking on, though, Carson. I think that I'm going to try to attack his handle, and I'm going to try to force him to beat me as a jump shooter, and I'm going to be aggressive in passing lanes. There's a lot of defensive keys I have for Cleveland, but that's where I'll start.
So when you're talking about not conceding those switches, what are you doing? What coverage are you playing against the Jays?
I think I'm going to give them a mix of zone. I think I'm going to try to mix in some of those looks, and I thought it
Well, they
worked to
did do
Cleveland's
that.
benefit. That's what I was going to say. They did implement that at certain points in the game. I'm switching up my coverages, and I'm giving them a lot to look at. I want Boston to be confused and not comfortable. It's tough because Cleveland likes to switch everything too, and Garland and Mitchell fight hard. It's a lot easier said than done. And maybe I'm playing off of some other guys. Like I said, the guy that's on Jaylen Brown, I'm probably going to have him sag off a little bit, and we're going to let Jaylen Brown shoot a little bit more because he has struggled so much from behind the arc. I want him to be the guy that's going to kill me. And when they're running bench guys like Hauser or Cornette, I'm probably helping off of those guys as well on those switches.
I'm not helping off Sammy Hauser ever once in my life, bro. He is a weapon with an open catch and shoot jumper.
You gotta pick your battles, man.
So we saw a lot of interesting pick and roll coverages thrown at specifically Jayson Tatum over this weekend because Jayson Tatum running pick and roll is a problem, and especially when he has the sort of shooting and offensive skill around him that he does, there's just not a ton of good answers to this. So I actually went through and I tracked by hand every coverage that Tatum saw on every ball screen and how the defenses performed in those different looks. What Cleveland was doing overwhelmingly was switching. That's their fundamental strategy. And Tatum did very, very well. In that game, he generated 24 points off of 18 possessions when they switched on a ball screen. So that's 1.25 points per possession. That's really, really great offense. And the big problem here is absolutely Darius Garland. He has improved defensively this year, but he's just still way too small for this matchup, and he's going to get attacked relentlessly. But it's not just Garland. It's Sam Merrill when he's on the floor. It's Ty Jerome when he's on the floor. Any of these smaller slider guards. Tatum and Brown were playing bully ball against those guys, and that's when they're at their best.
I don't think there's a good solution to Tatum. I think I'd blitz Jaylen Brown almost every time, though.
So I was going to get to a similar point to that because there is still such a gap between them as playmakers. With Tatum, I just never want to send two to the ball. I don't want to blitz. I don't want my big playing up at the level because I don't want to give him an opportunity to create a 4-on-3 or just to find an open shooter. Like if it's Derek White one pass away, like I'd rather make Jayson Tatum work for a 2 and maybe he settles for a little bit of a tougher mid-range jumper and he just tries to shoot over top of a smaller guard from 15 feet. I'll take that over a wide open Derek White 3 because Derek White, and it's not just him, it could be Pritchard, it could be Hauser, even Al Horford, KP. There's just so many lethal shooters on the floor. And then you could look and say, okay, well, we'll play drop against Tatum, which almost never happened in either of these games. Cleveland or Denver played almost no drop against Tatum. And like there's an argument that you do want to test how consistent can he be as a pull-up shooter because we have seen him go through his cold streaks there, if you think about the playoffs last year. But also, if I had to guess which coverage I think Jayson Tatum wants to see most, I think he wants to just be able to walk into a pull-up 3 against drop. And if you're just conceding open pull-up 3s and he gets into a rhythm, well, then now you feel like, okay, that's the worst thing we could be doing because we're not even forcing him to make a decision. This is just easy, free, walk-up sort of pull-up 3s for him, which he loves, and he's going to hunt throughout a game. So that's not a good answer. So I can live with the switching on Tatum. He also did a really good job against the bigs. I mean, he was cooking Jared Allen. He even cooked my beloved Evan Mobley a couple times. Those were tougher buckets, especially against Mobley. Mobley was forcing him to take pull-up jumpers, and he was just making all of them in the first half of this game. But Mobley guarded him really well in the playoff series last year.
Super contested, man. And Tatum was just making everything.
Mobley can guard him, but Allen, he was a little too quick for, and then he was being physical as a driver and giving him a bump. So he's going to hunt those switches. Those I think that you concede, though, because I feel good about how Mobley can guard him and good enough about how Allen can guard him. Garland is just the really, really tough one who's going to get attacked relentlessly, but there's not a good answer there with Tatum. There really isn't. With Brown, I think that I would probably just play drop against him, and I would try to force him to beat you as a pull-up shooter and force him to beat you from the mid-range, because Brown at times is more scary as a pure mismatch attacker than Tatum, because he's so relentlessly physical, because he is so inclined to just go through you.
He just backs you down to like that little short mid-range area and gets to that little tiny jumper, and it's automatic offense.
I mean, he's 8 of 11 when guarded by Darius Garland this year, Jaylen Brown is. So that's a major problem, and the reality is just that, like, as long as Boston targets Garland and they involve him in just about every action, they're going to get good shots pretty much at will. But also, I feel like I'm almost forgetting because he didn't play in this game, but when Kristaps Porzingis is on the floor and he's the screener, then it's really hard for you to play drop because he is an elite pick and pop big. So especially if Tatum is the ball handler who you trust to consistently find KP off the pop because he's a good passer, those are very problematic looks for you to be conceding. So KP is just a whole other problem to deal with all these ball screens. And also the other thing is, we're talking about them playing drop versus Jaylen. The reality is most of the time when Garland ends up on Jaylen, it's not in a sort of conventional pick and roll. It's a guard on guard screen that is never intended to flow directly into like a pick and roll or pick and pop. It's just to force the switch so then Brown can go and attack him on an island. And the reality is that they're probably just going to continue to switch those sort of guard-to-guard or wing-to-wing screens. So it's tough. There isn't a good answer, and that's the reason I think Boston is still the favorite in this matchup, as good as Cleveland is. Cleveland has a vulnerability defensively that Boston can attack. Boston has nothing resembling a weak point. They're strong everywhere.
I tend to agree. And the one thing I was going to say, though, is I think you can force Jaylen Brown into some mistakes if you switch up the coverage. I wouldn't run straight drop. I would definitely blitz him sometimes and try to get the ball out of his hands, or just speed these guys up and try to, like, just disrupt them a little bit. You don't want them to be comfortable. And against great players, that's all you really can do is try to get up on them. And like I said, just speed them up a little bit. Make them make that pass a little bit quicker and hope that your guy can jump a passing lane. But there isn't a good answer, and I don't have one, because there's just you said it. There's two glaring liabilities at all time with your best offensive configuration. That being said, that's why I'm really, really confident in Cleveland being able to throw a potent offensive punch. And the area where I think Garland and Mitchell need to be at their best is from the mid-range. And what I mean by that is I think that's where Boston's defense is going to be vulnerable and where they can really go to work. I think that's where this series is going to be decided for them. And Garland, Mitchell, and Ty Jerome, I all believe in them in the mid-range, either scoring out of it or playmaking out of it, because, well, one, Mitchell's just a great scorer. I think Mitchell can be able to float this offense for a lot of this series. Pull-up jumpers, stuff at the rim. That's why I love Donovan Mitchell, because he's so constant. And I get he'll have a down game, so will every basketball player. But Mitchell, for the most part, can get those two shots at will. But Darius Garland, in a lot of ways, is the guy that just keeps this thing going because he's so special. Like, Garland is such a good ball handler, and he's so deceptive with his handle, the head fakes, the hesitations, the control of the ball. He's able to get into the teeth of this defense at will. And I know on paper you'll look and you'll go, all right, Derek White and Drew Holiday will be able to match them. And I think that's true at full strength. But Darius Garland is so good offensively that I think he's going to be able to continue to manufacture offense. It's just not going to be the easy shots that Cleveland wants, at the rim and from behind the arc. So the area where I think Garland really needs to be nails is in the mid-range with his floater and with his pull-up, which is encouraging because he's been great from there this year. He's also been phenomenal playmaking. Like, he's just so good at getting into the teeth of the defense and then killing you after that with passes out to shooters. I get that he doesn't blow you away scoring the basketball. He does pull his weight. He gives you 5 points in the fourth quarter when nobody else is really giving Cleveland anything. Evan Mobley was also awesome in the fourth quarter. I'll get to him in a minute, but
oh yeah, please do.
Garland, I trust them. I trust the guards to continue manufacturing and pumping out offense all series long. They've been great all year, and they were able to generate really good shots. So, along with being great in the mid-range, scoring and playmaking, I think shooters have to knock down shots, and you have to keep pace with Boston from behind the arc. Mismatch attacking is Boston's superpower. So are threes, and that's how they got out to such a big early lead in this game. But the three-pointer is a pendulum. And I think ultimately Boston is going to swing even. In a lot of ways that it's their superpower, I think it could be their kryptonite. Long rebounds, the offense gets out into transition. So Cleveland's wings, I think, are going to have to shoot a lot of threes, be confident in themselves, and they're going to have to knock them down. And I like Cleveland's wings a lot. Strus, Dean Wade, DeAndre Hunter, I really like all those guys knocking down shots and playing defense. So those, I think, are important. Arguably the most important factor in this series for Cleveland is going to be Evan Mobley, though. And I think it is really, really important that he takes on more offensive responsibility and asserts himself. He has the size and physicality to impose himself in this game, and he gives you 11 points in the fourth quarter when Cleveland desperately needed somebody to step up. It's a very simple offensive game, but his physical advantages he can exert. In that fourth quarter, he gets a switch on Derek White and just backs his ass into him all the way down to the rim and gets a bucket. And Mobley's going to have to take over at certain points because he's the guy that can attack mismatches. In the ways that Boston is getting those switches offensively on the other end with their big guys, that's what Cleveland's going to have to do. Mobley can't be passive. Mobley cannot be scared. He was in the first half, and that's what scares me. You see his bad hands at a certain point with Mobley. You see he has a lack of a counter on drive sometimes. And can just be, like I said, like a little pensive, a little bit passive. I need Mobley to be aggressive. I need him to trust himself. I need him to shoot open threes. But most importantly, I really need him to attack mismatches and just other general things here with Cleveland. They need to win the energy and effort categories. They need to hustle on the glass. I mean, these are just basic things to win basketball games. And then I think they need to convincingly win bench minutes, which I would give advantage Cleveland. In this one, the numbers are a little bit skewed just because Tatum and Brown were so awesome. They really didn't need the bench to do a whole lot. And so those are my offensive keys. But I don't think they're that complicated, Carson. And I wouldn't just be ready to count Cleveland out. I obviously lean Boston because I think they have such concrete offensive advantages that are really hard for Cleveland to answer with. But I really believe in this Cleveland offense. The guy that's going to put them over the top for me is Evan Mobley, though.
The Cleveland offense is amazing. It's been the best offense in terms of offensive rating end-to-end this year, and I believe it is currently the second best relative offensive rating. That's offensive rating compared to league average in NBA history. So it's crazy. We have like a top 2 relative offense and a top 2 relative defense with OKC both going down this season. And we just have 2 historically dominant regular season teams right now who I still don't know if they're getting talked about enough. LeBron certainly doesn't think they're getting talked about enough.
They're 50-10, man.
Absolutely absurd. And the Thunder are like second all time in net rating right now? I mean, these teams are both ridiculous. So the offense is phenomenal. I do think the keys for them on that side of the ball to win this series, Donovan Mitchell probably has to be the best offensive player in this series, which I do think you can expect. The problem is he's just fighting a tougher battle because of the personnel he's going up against. Not that he hasn't cooked the Celtics, because he has. I mean, he's averaging 35.5 points per game on 62% true shooting against them this year across 4 games. He was destroying them last year in the playoffs when he was healthy. Like, I really don't think they can do anything with him, especially when he's on as a pull-up shooter and he can get downhill at will. It's just such a crazy combination that leads to these really unique scoring explosions. But Mitchell has to be better offensively than Tatum. And again, the reason that that's hard-ish, it's definitely not impossible, but Tatum is just able to pinpoint weak points in a way that Mitchell is not. And we're talking about all the different things that you can do. Like, I should have maybe explained more. The reason that they're going to always switch these sort of guard on guard or guard on wing screens when you have a perimeter player screening for Tatum or Brown, if it's Derek White, you're not sending 2 to the ball. You're not trying to fight through and stay on your matchups, because if he slips out, 25 feet out, he's automatic. Like, you just cannot leave that guy. It's such a pick your poison situation. Mitchell doesn't have those sort of advantages that he can try to exploit, but he can absolutely be a monster. They also do need Darius Garland to be way better than he has been versus Boston. We can talk about the defensive end. Frankly, I don't think that he can do much better there. I mean, he's just totally outmatched. It's not an effort thing. It's a size thing. It's a strength thing. It's an athleticism thing. But he hasn't been good offensively versus Boston. I mean, he's just 19-6 on 45% true shooting this year. And he was really bad in the playoff series last year. Now, that was a totally different player. Garland has gotten so much better since last season. But this is a team that has elite defensive guards. Garland should be able to get by them, and I think you see in spots when he really commits to getting dribble penetration in this game, he can do it. He's so quick. His handle is top 2 in the league, and it really might not be 2, Logan. Darius Garland might have the nastiest handle in the league.
I was wondering that watching this game, man.
Obviously, everybody will talk about Kyrie, who a lot of people think has the greatest
Steph
handle
too.
ever, and I can't argue with that. I think Garland's handle is better than Steph. I mean, Steph's is all time. What I'll say is, Garland's hesitation dribble is the nastiest dribble move in the NBA today.
Dude, it gets everybody.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievably disgusting. And he has everything in his bag. So he can get that sort of dribble penetration. And then the challenge is finishing at the rim, especially when KP is on the floor. He's not going to get a lot of good looks at the rim, but the guy's shooting 60+% on floaters this year. He's been the best guard in basketball at floaters. So Garland is a sort of elite offensive player who should be like matchup proof at this stage. When he's this good as a pull-up shooter, when he's this good from floater range, when he's this good as a playmaker, he just needs to play up to his level in this matchup. And he was solid offensively in this past game. He wasn't his best game, but he had a solid outing. And then I'll say specifically with Evan Mobley, it's just the aggression. Like, that's what I really need to see from him. Specifically, stepping into threes and punishing switches, which is exactly what he did in the fourth quarter. Because sometimes you have this thing, especially with these bigs, where like if you leave them wide open and you give them 2 seconds, yeah, they'll shoot 37%. But if you close out, the release is just a little too slow or it's a little too tentative. You actually see this all the time with Jokic, right? The guy shoots 44% from 3, but what's the one fault of his 3-point shot? It's that slow ass release where he really needs a lot of time and space to shoot it. Otherwise, you close out well enough, he's going to probably try to get you with the pump and go. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it negates an advantage because you passed up on an open 3. That was happening with Mobley in the first half, where these closeouts were deterring him from taking these threes. And then in the second half, he's more confidently, more quickly walking into those threes, taking those catch and shoot looks. That's important, those sort of quick release threes for him. And then punishing the switches. You mentioned the back down on Derek White, where he was very patient, which I loved. He was physical. He did not force up a subpar look. He didn't panic, and the help didn't come soon enough, so he was able to cook him one-on-one. But just as impactful is what he can do on the glass against those switches, which you saw in the fourth quarter. He had 8 rebounds in that quarter, and he had 3 offensive rebounds, all of which came off of switches. He's got the size advantage. Another time he had the Derek White switch and the double did come, but he created a wide open 3 for Okoro. So like, it's not always just about scoring in that matchup. It's about taking advantage of that matchup in all of the ways. But I thought Evan Mobley was the best player in the fourth quarter of this game. I mean, certainly the first 6 minutes of the fourth quarter, he absolutely dominated. And then Kenny took him out of the game for a little bit for some reason, I guess to get him a breather, but I didn't like that decision. But that's the Mobley you need, because the defensive impact will always be there. How much can he tap into his unique skill set offensively? And then you touched on this, but I just think they need to outshoot Boston in a series like this, not in terms of raw 3-point volume, but in terms of efficiency from beyond the arc. These are 2 elite 3-point shooting teams. I just don't know how you beat Boston if their 3-ball is falling, and then they can also find whatever mismatch they want inside the arc like they can in this series. And I think that they need to outplay Boston in the clutch. And Cleveland has been unbelievable in the clutch this year. Like, their clutch numbers are insane. They're 19-6 in clutch games. They have a 141 offensive rating in the clutch. And they won this game in the clutch. But my one concern, the one tendency that we can see from them in terms of clutch offense that I don't like, and it really only appears, I feel like, in big games, but we've seen it in the playoffs a lot, is Donovan Mitchell hero ball. He was the best player on the floor for Cleveland in this game. He went off, but you look at the final few minutes of this game, he jacked up 2 contested pull-up threes that were way off, and sometimes he gets in that mode. Like, I don't want him dictating every possession just because I think this offense in totality is so good and because Garland is so good, but I especially don't want him just walking down and taking tough pull-up threes every possession. Like, I always think that Mitchell is at his best when he's a downhill guard and he has this crazy handle and footwork and touch and finishing in the lane. Like, I don't like it when we get that super pull-up three heavy hero ball Donovan Mitchell in the clutch. And then the way that they ice this game is Darius Garland hunts Sam Hauser, which is smart, right? Find the weakest link defensively, even though Hauser's competitive. The problem is you get fully healthy Boston and the defense is more strong and more bulletproof because now it's Drew Holiday out there as your guard and it's KP out there as your big. So I've been saying it all year, man. That's just the real advantage for Boston. It's just the fact that their defense is so elite across the board. And then you get KP back, and I think that it changes both sides of the ball because he is such a weapon offensively. He does bring even more of that lethal pick and pop game. And then also if he gets a switch, I mean, he's the most brutal mismatch attacker on the team. And he brings that real high-end rim protection that, as good as Al Horford still is, and my God, he gave him some good minutes, KP is a completely different level as a rim protector. They have no holes, man. They're a juggernaut.
They really don't. I mean, he takes away shots that, are really great looks in the playoffs just because of his length, right? Like those little mid-range shots that you can only get there. And Cleveland lived on that a lot of this game, too. I think he's their second-best player. I think, yeah, he just changes. He changes everything. And so I think the Celtics are vulnerable without Kristaps Porzingis. I think I would still pick them to beat Cleveland even without him, just because their size really is that deciding factor. But I think the Cavaliers are on their level, and without KP, I would give them an opportunity. But if he's healthy, I don't think I could pick against Boston.
What percentage chance would you give Cleveland? Because I said a while ago, a month and change ago, when we were talking about these two teams, that I would give Cleveland like a 20% chance in the best-of-7 series. Then we talked before this game on last show, and I said, no, I think I'd give Cleveland like a 30% chance. Now I'm going to settle in between, and I'm going to say 25. Because even having seen Cleveland win this game, they won it without KP and without Drew Holiday on the floor. And, like, they had to play so well offensively, which they can do, but it's so easy for Boston to get whatever shot they want every time down the floor. It just feels like they'd have to check all the boxes that we just talked about for them to win this series, whereas I think Boston has a little bit more margin. I mean, Boston has more margin than everybody because they're so talented and they're so good on both sides of the ball, and there's nothing that you can exploit. So I'm going to say 25% chance that Cleveland beats Boston in a 7-game series.
I like that number. I agree.
I really hope that this is what we get as our Eastern Conference Finals because this could be the best Eastern Conference Finals of my lifetime.
A war, man, a battle. I mean,
absolute war.
I just don't think there's anybody on their level, and I really hope it doesn't come down to like an injury or something like that. I just think that these are two of the three best teams in basketball, and I don't know. I would feel really disappointed if we didn't get that. Also, real quick, I wanted to add this before we move on.
Yeah.
The Cavs are the 12th team in NBA history to go 50-10 through their first 60 games.
Wow.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them went on to win the championship. One more team also went to the finals. That was the 2016 Warriors. Maybe we'll do that as a trivia time sometime.
Yeah, that'd be a fun list. I'm trying to think about other Eastern Conference Finals that would be comparable in terms of the matchup. 2012 Celtics Heat was a banger. 82 you have Celtics Sixers, banger. And way back in the day you get Sixers Celtics with Wilt. But like these are two unbelievable teams, and the East really hasn't been that great for most of this century. So I think it's really, really fun. If we don't get these two, if injury or some weirdness deprives us, I'll be super upset. We're not done talking about the Celtics, though, because they took part in the 2 games of the weekend. I think that Cavs-Celtics was clearly the best. Again, maybe the game of the year. But they also played Denver on national TV in what ended up being a pretty good game. And this one was a Boston win. What were your takeaways from this one, Logan? And do you think the Nuggets are fake contenders after some of the struggles that we've seen them have against really good teams lately?
I could never call a team that has the best player in the world fake contenders just because I believe that much singularly in Nikola Jokic. But I do think that for Denver to go on another championship run, they'd need a lot to go right. The issue early in the season was Jamal Murray pulling his weight, and I'm pretty confident Jamal, with the level that he's been at as a tough shot maker and just doing his thing alongside Jokic. But the flags, the red flags are glaring with this team. The big one to me is I still wonder if this team just has enough shooting around them, and primarily because they're depending on Russell Westbrook and Christian Brown so much in this lineup to make open jumpers. And you think about a playoff series and you think about the adjustments that a team would run against Denver, and it's really very simple. Denver has, and this is big minutes with both of these guys specifically on the floor, and you can substitute Aaron Gordon into this equation too, because it's basically the exact same thing what you're going to do defensively against these guys. At any given time, Denver is probably only going to have three guys that you're really scared of killing you on the perimeter, and that's Michael Porter Jr., that's Jamal Murray, and that's Nikola Jokic, which means the other two guys, that being Gordon, Brown, or Westbrook, you're going to help off of those guys, and you're going to be really, really comfortable with them shooting open threes so you can divert more attention to those guys and take away the looks that they have. And that's what a lot of teams employ. Deep into this basketball game, they were 2 of 11 on open threes. That was deep into the third quarter. And I just wonder if that's what's going to kill them, man. Like, can I depend on Russell Westbrook and Christian Brown to make enough of these open looks? I don't know. This team is also, on top of that, going to struggle athletically and defensively. They have glaring personnel limitations, right, where you can go at certain guys in the lineup, especially a Jamal Murray, right, a Jokic on the interior. He just is not a one-man defense in the way you need to. And they also don't have good backup bigs to turn to. I know you were talking about that on I saw you tweet out a little bit about that, and that's a major component. You don't even have a guy at your 4 or 5 spot that can, change the game defensively. So teams are always going to eat on the interior against Denver, and you're going to need better in effort and energy on that end. And Carson, I see those things. That's what's problematic to me with Denver, Carson. These aren't things that are just an issue against Boston. These aren't things that are just an issue against Oklahoma City. These aren't things that are just an issue against X matchup, right? A lot of the things that we were just discussing with Cleveland and Boston, Cleveland struggles are unique to that matchup against Boston because Boston is, as you said, a juggernaut. I don't think any of these issues are unique to Denver in a specific matchup. I think their fundamental weakness is against any matchup that they're going to run to in the Western Conference. And so I'll give them a fighting chance against any team in the Western Conference. But these are all things that I think a good basketball team, and there are a lot of them in the Western Conference, that they can exploit against Denver. And that's what really scares me, man. It's not a matchup-dependent thing with Denver. It's against everybody. And I'm disappointed, Carson. I had really high expectations for Denver coming into this season. And as the season continues to go on, I just worry about this team being a serious contender. I've kind of talked myself into it, man. I do... They're getting there for me. They're getting into that fake contender tier where, Oklahoma City is by themselves, I think, atop the Western Conference still. I think they've earned that with how dominant they've been this regular season down Chet Holmgren. I don't know, man. LA is climbing for me. The Lakers, to be specific, they're climbing. They're very hot. I think Denver's not in that top tier to me. I think Oklahoma City has earned that top notch, and then I wonder if it's everybody else. And I don't know if Denver is number 2 or number 3 or number 4 for me anymore. I could see them getting knocked off. Again, I have to respect what this offense can do, and I have to respect Nikola Jokic as the best player in the world. But like I said, the red flags are glaring with this team, and I think they're glaring against any matchup in the Western Conference in any round.
When we're talking about where they stack up against the other really good teams in basketball, my feeling for a long while has been that you have your absolute top tier, which is the big 3 teams this year, that being Boston, OKC, and Cleveland. And then Denver has been a clear 4th best team for me. I can't say that they're that anymore. We just had this conversation with the Knicks last week talking about, are the Knicks fake contenders? And I think that Denver is clearly better than New York. New York gets blown out against a lot of these elite teams. We haven't necessarily seen that happen to Denver. And I do think that Denver has the advantage of having the best player in the world. I think that they honestly have a higher ceiling on both sides of the ball than New York, but they do suffer from some of the same issues. Their limitations defensively and just overall. The thing that I think stands out about Denver from all of these matchups that we've watched in recent weeks against really good teams, against the Lakers, against Milwaukee, now against Boston, Denver has some A-plus strengths when you look at that offense. They also have real weaknesses in a way that Cleveland does not, certainly. Real weaknesses in a way that even OKC with their offensive questions does not have, because they're still a really, really good half-court offense, clutch offense. They just have these stretches. They have the non-SGA minutes that get ugly. Denver has real weaknesses in a way that certainly Boston does not, obviously. We just talked about they're the team that has no holes. And they have weaknesses on both sides of the ball, I think, is the disappointing part. Because defensively, it's no surprise that they're absolutely in a conundrum against a team like Boston. How do they guard this pick and roll attack? How do they guard a bunch of ball screens for Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown? They don't have good answers. You see them switching these guard on guard screens, guard on wing screens, where Jamal Murray finds himself on the Jays. And that's a pretty tough matchup. Jaylen Brown, when guarded by Jamal Murray, has 20 points on 64% true shooting this year. Tatum had an off shooting game against Denver, so his numbers aren't as great from this season over a small sample, but you still feel like he's really getting what he wants in that matchup. The one thing I will say, because we were just talking about Garland and how much of a nightmare this is for him, it's not Garland level for Jamal, because he is bigger, he is stronger, so he can provide a little bit more resistance when he's fighting and like force them to shoot over top from a little bit further out, whereas sometimes Garland is just like conceding actual layups, or he's conceding these short jumpers that almost feel like layups. And sometimes Murray is letting these guys get to those really short jumpers, but sometimes, it's a 15-footer and it's like, hey, at least you make the guy make the shot. But it's still a mismatch. It's still a big-time mismatch, and they will just go at him relentlessly as a defensive weak point. Then, when you have Jokic involved as the pick-and-roll defender, their default coverage is send two to the ball. Either blitz outright or have Jokic play up at the level. Try to provide some pressure on a Jayson Tatum. And they forced a couple turnovers doing that, but they also let up 1.25 points per Tatum ball screen when they sent two to the ball, because he's a good playmaker. I think there's a legitimate case that he's a better playmaker than a scorer at this point in his career. And if you are going to send two to the ball, that means somebody is open somewhere, and somebody is open on the Boston Celtics, and that guy is probably a really, really good shooter. And again, like, it's generally better to make anybody work for their bucket than to give an open shot to this team. That's the predicament that they're in. And like, you're not going to play drop against them with Jokic. We saw them play some drop with DeAndre Jordan but Jokic just isn't a good deep drop defender. Maybe they could try that, but at that point, you're basically just saying, okay, Tatum, make open pull-up threes, but like, we're not going to get a contest on those shots. We're not going to make life hard on you there. So defensively, Boston's going to get what they want in this matchup, and Boston gets what they want against basically anybody, as we just talked about against Cleveland, but even more so against Denver on average. And offensively, this Denver offense is great. I mean, I'd been saying that I thought they were the best offense in the league with some of the added juice that they have this year, with more athleticism, with more cutting, with more ball handling, with the growth of Christian Brown and Russ fitting in so well and really overperforming here. But when you see them up against serious defenses, serious teams who are treating these games with a legitimate game plan, right? As if you were sort of going to walk into a playoff matchup.
This is still a champion. You know what I mean? It still means something to beat Denver. Like, teams are bringing their A game against them.
For sure. And they've gone up against a couple really good coaches, Joe Mazzulla and J.J. Redick. last week, who obviously put on a masterclass in terms of coaching. But the strategy, honestly, at this point is pretty simple, right? And there are variations on to what extent you're doubling Jokic or whatever, but just fundamentally, teams are going to load up the paint. They're going to load up on Jokic. They're going to try to take away cutters, and they're going to try to limit Jokic's scoring volume, and they are going to concede threes to Russ and Christian Brown all day, and Aaron Gordon when he's on the floor, and Peyton Watson when he gets back and he's on the floor. But in this game, it's just Russ and Christian Brown. Those guys took 16 threes against Boston, and they made 4 of them. But even if they made
they were
6,
mostly all wide open, too.
wide open. And it's still a huge win for the defense if guys are taking those shots. And like Christian Brown ends up with 24 points in this game, I believe, on 21 shots. He had a couple of really good moments, but it's detrimental to the offense if the other team doesn't have to guard a guy, especially if they don't have to guard 2 guys. So
well, you've got
realistically,
extra guys that can. You've got extra guys that can play defense, extra guys that get on the glass, and then at that point, I mean, those are basically 12 wasted possessions.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're wasting possessions. I think that Russ is going to have to be like an 18-minute per game guy for them in the playoffs. He's had such a good year, but these are the matchups against really good teams where I just think they're going to ignore him off ball. And then you just really don't want him playing off ball, right? He's shown an ability to be an excellent cutter, but if his defender is just sitting in the paint in a helping position, like, there's nothing he can do there. He can't cut, and they'll bait him into taking open catch-and-shoot threes, and he'll take those open catch-and-shoot threes because he's a confident guy, and he'll miss most of them, and they aren't the shots that you want as an offense. They're the exact sort of shots that the defense wants you taking. So, like I said, I think it's going to be like 18 minutes a game for him in the playoffs, mostly in the non-Murray minutes alongside Jokic. That's when he's at his best, when he can be on ball a majority of the time, and when he can play the two-man game with Jokic, which has been so good for them. But if you're talking about trying to fit him and Murray together, I mean, we saw some real high points for those two together this year, higher than I ever expected. But again, in these matchups, it just hasn't worked, and I think it doesn't work. So that's the thing, man. Like, they have their stuff that they do at an unbelievable level, and most of it is oriented around Nikola Jokic, but they also have these major red flags. I also thought that Boston did a really great job in this game of keeping them from getting out in transition as much as they would like. Denver only had 14 transition points in this game. Their season average is 25.6, so they basically had half of their regular transition production. That also hurts Christian Brown and Russ specifically because that's where they're at their best as athletes in the full court. And then I thought that Denver's clutch execution in this game was really, really bad. I actually thought that they defended pretty well down the stretch of this game. I thought that they got enough stops in the final few minutes to come back and win this. It was offensively where in the last 2.5 minutes, these are all their possessions. Jokic is seeing a lot of traffic in the paint. He fires a pass to Russ in the dunker spot. Russ drops it, turnover. Next possession down in transition. Jokic throws a hit-ahead pass to Christian Brown, who's one-on-one with, I think, Tatum in transition. It's not the most accurate pass. CB catches it on the baseline, kind of far from the basket, but he collects himself, still tries to attack, but now he's kind of looking at like a one-on-three because Boston's defense has gotten back, and he gets blocked. Next possession down. MPJ shoots an extremely long two, like a right inside the arc two, off of a handoff from Russ, and then they get one stop and they just like run a calm half-court offensive possession with Jamal Murray, and he gets a bucket, and then they kind of lose this game on a sequence where Russ allows an offensive rebound to Derek White because he gambled with some pretty dumb late help, and then on the other side, Jamal can't get a clean pass off to Jokic, and that's the game. But like, how many of those possessions that I just described is Nikola Jokic involved in the half-court? 0 half-court touches except for the pass that he made to Russ, and then Russ just dropped it. So, like, it wasn't good, composed half-court offense going through their best player, who's the best player on the planet, and that's just, like, a really dumb way to lose that I don't view as a long-term concern for them because their clutch offense has been really good this year, but specifically in this game, they just can't afford to flub stuff like that. That's as big a takeaway as anything. Both these teams are down key guys. Boston doesn't have KP and Drew. Denver doesn't have Aaron Gordon and Peyton Watson. But the difference in margin is massive because Tatum had a pretty bad game. He shot 4 of 15. He had 6 turnovers. I mean, really, really struggled as a scorer. And still, throughout, you feel like Boston is comfortable. You feel like they're in a good position. You feel like they should be the team that wins this game. And I feel like that kind of tells you all that you need to know when you're considering, like, oh, Denver is a team. Are they on even footing with Boston? Clearly not. And I don't think anybody said that, but I think that they're pretty far away. And I think that they're maybe even farther away than I would have thought earlier in the year.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's where I'm at, man.
Also, can I just say one other guy who is at fault for a lot of these recent Denver struggles against good teams? MPJ, in these 3 losses to LA, Milwaukee, and Boston, 11.7 points per game on 37% true shooting, under 24% from 3. He's been very, very bad. And Boston is the team that's missing the better players in this matchup. KP and Drew are certainly better than Aaron Gordon and Peyton Watson in totality, but you could argue that it hurts Denver more to be down those 2 guys just because Boston still only puts good basketball players on the floor.
Yeah, exactly.
Denver is now having to play Jalen Pickett. And I saw some Nuggets fan tweet, well, DeAndre Jordan is unbelievable, and Neemias Queta is Boston's 4th center, and he's way better than DeAndre Jordan, who is the Nuggets' backup center and has been their backup center for 3 years.
So
I know they
crazy,
drafted
man.
Deron Holmes, but
there's
like
gotta be somebody,
malpractice.
dude. There's gotta be somebody in the Euro League right now or the G League that could give them some juice. Dude,
I mean, there's
Oscar
a whole lot of backup centers.
Dude, Oscar Tshiebwe was given the Jazz. He gave him 14 and 16 the other night, and the only reason he doesn't get burned is because he's 6'9". I get it, man, but like
Rebounding
DeAndre
monster
Jordan,
Moses Jr.
DeAndre Jordan in the big 2025, man.
It's bad, dude. It's really bad, and he was bad in this game. I mean, his finishing is so bad. Defensively, the
and
IQ
he's just not
is not
mobile
there.
anymore, man. He can't move.
Nah, he's bad, dude. And Boston on the other side, like all of their guys who see the floor are really solid. And I saw some Nuggets fan on Twitter being like, oh, Michael Malone should be ashamed that he hasn't been playing Jalen Pickett for the last year and a half. What, man? People blaming coaches for everything is one of the most interesting phenomena in sports to me, because like Jalen Pickett is not a rotation NBA player. I don't know what you're seeing because he made a 3 in this game.
Yes, exactly.
He's a weird basketball player. So, like, could Denver beat Boston in a best-of-7 series? I don't know how they could. And if they can't do that, how can you say that they can win the title?
This is minor, too, but, I mean, he gets decent minutes for them. I mean, Julian Strother got injured in this one, too. I hope it's not anything serious, but he left with, like, a left knee injury. I mean, he's like one of their only actual floor spacers on this team, and, I mean, that just adds – it just exacerbates the issue, man. I don't feel good about Denver right now.
You mentioned Zeke Naji getting minutes. I will say he's been better as of late. I mean, he's active defensively. He knocked down a wide-open 3 in this game and has made a couple threes as of late. But, like, is he a guy who would be in the rotation for any of these elite teams who we're talking about? Is he in OKC or Cleveland or Boston's rotation? Of course not. Of course not. And is he even in the Nuggets playoff rotation? Probably not. But the fact that it's a conversation, even though he has been playing better, just tells you a lot about the depth of this team. I mean, I mentioned the tweet on our last show from Tyler, Hoop Venue, who was talking about the top fours in the league. Boston, Cleveland, OKC, and Denver, and how they might be relatively close. But then you go through the 5 through 8, and there's a massive gap between the other 3 teams and Denver. And that's a really, really big difference here. So, yeah, I won't fully call them fake contenders, but they are certainly tier 2 contenders, and they're in the mix with a bunch of teams who, like, I don't think really have a chance to win it all. I think it's 3 teams that have a legitimate chance to win it all this year, and honestly, I'm not sure that Denver is still 4th at this point. We're going to talk about another team that is just continuing to make a stronger case for that 4th spot and looks like a more complete basketball team right now. I do still think that Denver's offense is elite, but it's not as infallible as I thought, and the limitations of a couple of these role players have presented real issues as of late. On the other side, Boston is insane, and we talk about how it feels like they're impossible to stop from getting the looks they want in so many of these matchups. this is the reason that I think OKC has the best chance against them. And I've thought that before the year, and I've thought that consistently even as Cleveland has emerged as an unbelievable team. I still think OKC has the better chance because they're the only team I think can slow them down. They're the only team that has the defensive personnel and the ceiling on that end to maybe make them uncomfortable.
And the athleticism and the size. I mean, they're not playing any guys in their starting lineup that are smaller than 6'5", 6'6". So it's like
nobody
they can match them there. They also have 2 big 7-footers and 2 guys who can protect the rim. I completely agree, man.
Insane group of perimeter defenders. Maybe lacking a bit in terms of like the sort of big, thick perimeter guys outside of Lou Dort who you want to guard the Jays because they can do that sort of power mismatch attacking bully ball. But they still have a hell of a lot of great perimeter defenders. You can throw J-Dub in that matchup. You can throw
and those rotations are crisp. I mean, it is the best defense in basketball.
If anybody ever is going to send 2 to the ball, it's OKC who can do it and like not get punished for it because they rotate so quickly and they force so many mistakes and they're so ridiculously fast and engaged. So I do think that they have the best chance in that matchup. But even though they lost against the Cavs, I mean, the fact that Boston is this good without 2 of their 5 best players, like, I get it. They're not having as dominant a regular season as last year, but I do think they're an even better team than the team that just won the title in pretty dominant fashion. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From monster slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props.
Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking how many points your favorite player will have. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. First timers, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly.
Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code NERDS. That's code NERDS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. We've been doing a lot of talking about the best in the league, Logan. Let's flip the vibes on their head for a second and let's talk about a bummer of a story and a team that has really had a nightmare season. Joel Embiid is officially out for the year with the knee injuries that have just continued for him. We talked about this a bit last show, but the Sixers are apparently exploring some radical operations. We even heard a report that if they can't get things better this offseason, they might consider petitioning for a medical retirement for Joel Embiid. So a lot of the discourse around the NBA world right now is basically RIP to Embiid's career. Basically people saying this is probably it for him. And I don't think that's an unreasonable stance when you consider how many injuries have stacked up, how persistent this has been, how dire the reporting out of Philly is, how bad he looked when he was on the floor this year. All of those factors considered, like, we probably will never see the same Joel Embiid that we saw before this injury again. So considering that, Logan, is Joel Embiid the biggest what if in NBA history in your eyes?
I think the biggest what if in NBA history is probably Len Bias. I do think Embiid is up there, but you were saying RIP to his career. Len Bias actually passed away shortly after draft night. The Celtics had taken him. He was going to get paired up with Bird and McHale and Parrish and a pretty legendary Celtics team. I mean, it would have been maybe one of the best duos in basketball. Unfortunately, Len had a heart problem, and I believe he had something go on, like overdose-wise or a heart arrhythmia that they got him because of cocaine use that night. But I think Len was going to be special. My dad always talks about him. He was really tapped into ACC basketball and basketball in general back then, and he said that Len gave him the same feeling that Michael Jordan did. He watched MJ at North Carolina. He watched Len at Maryland. And great athlete, great player. And I just think there's a lot of great ones, and we'll discuss them. But just how tragic the fact that he never saw the court and how, I mean, it's maybe the most ideal situation that an NBA player has ever walked into. A player of that caliber that would have walked into such a win-now situation. As a basketball fan, you just sit back and wonder what if? What would have that looked like? I think some other good honorable mentions. Derrick Rose. I think Yao Ming with his debilitating injuries because of his frame. Similar ilk with Ralph Sampson. If we want to get, tragic as well, Drazen Petrovic. I think Jay Williams as well with his motorcycle accident is an interesting one. Embiid certainly up there though, man. But I can't say that we, unfortunately, couldn't have seen this coming. He had 2 major knee injuries in his first 2 seasons, right? Embiid struggled to make his debut. It's sad, man. You hate when things come to this, and it's why I've always been skeptical of Embiid. And so, I mean, he's going to be one of the greatest players ever that this happened to, an MVP on the short list. I think it is. Bill Walton as well. I'm talking about all these guys with injuries. Bill Walton's an all-timer as well, man. I think he's on the short list.
This obviously sucks a lot, what's happened to Embiid. You always hate to see a great talent's career cut short in any way by injuries. It's one of the worst things that happens in sports. The reason that I don't think you can call him the biggest what if ever, which I have seen a lot of people doing, is he got to play in 7 postseasons through his age 30 season. Was he 100% healthy for all of them? No, he was not, especially last year coming off the torn meniscus. But that's an opportunity that a lot of these other great talents haven't had. When you think about Bill Walton, who is healthy for 1 postseason in his career, and he wins the whole damn thing, goes out there and cements himself as that sort of all-time great. Kawhi Leonard, after reaching an all-star level, has only had 3 postseasons where he was even healthy enough to finish, and he consistently got better in the playoffs when he could play. And he had his iconic title run in 2019 where he left no doubt. And he said, even though I'm going to be deprived of many opportunities going forward, he didn't know that. He didn't say that. But that was the reality, that he would be limited in terms of his opportunities by injuries. He still went out there and had that iconic run. Joel Embiid just consistently underperformed on that playoff stage, more so than probably any other player in NBA history. You look at his playoff career, the regular season production from 2018 to 2024, compared to the playoffs, he drops off by almost 4 points per game. His effective field goal percentage drops by 5 points. He has a negative assist to turnover ratio in the playoffs. And it gets even worse than that when you look at the big moments. Embiid in the clutch in his playoff career, 17 of 60 shooting, Logan, 28% in the clutch in the postseason, in all 4th quarters in the playoffs. 41% shooting from the field in 11 elimination games in his playoff career. 23 points per game, 2.7 assists to 5 turnovers, twice as many turnovers as assists, under 40% from the field, 26% from 3, 50% true shooting. That is a shockingly bad, a historically bad stat line in those big game clutch situations for a player of his caliber. So he had his chances. And in the biggest moments, he just failed and he didn't play up to his own level time and again. Is he still a what if? Of course he is. Of course he's a what if, because he's a monumental talent who only got to play in 50% of his regular season games in his career. And we very well may have seen the last of him at 30. That all still sucks, and that's all still a career cut short. But again, when you compare it to a Walton or a Kawhi, those are guys who are all-time great talents, who showed they were at that level in the biggest moments and got even better, and then they just got stripped of any chances going forward by injury. And then, you mentioned there are so many just flat-out tragedies. Drazen Petrovic, Reggie Lewis, Len Bias, of course. You have Maurice Stokes way back in the day who only got to play 2 seasons. You have the super talented guys who got injured very early on. You didn't mention Greg Oden. And then you have Derrick Rose, who's coming off the youngest MVP season in NBA history, and he would never be a star again after an injury that he suffered at 23 years old. All of those, I think you have to consider bigger what ifs, because those guys really never had the opportunity, or their opportunities were severely limited. That's just not the case for Embiid. It sucks what has happened. It's awful, but I honestly think it's kind of disrespectful to all of those other guys who we just talked about to say that Embiid is the biggest what if ever.
I think you're just conveniently overlooking all of his shortcomings. And we saw them even up into this last postseason run. And I don't want to be uber negative, but like you said, we saw him struggle passing out of double teams. I mean, very like general stuff. We saw his jump shot completely let him down. We saw the lack of effort sometimes on defense. And like, don't get me wrong, I think injuries played into some of these things too. Like, was Embiid ever at 100% healthy? I don't know. I mean, like, I'm in general, like, considering the fact that the first 2 years of his career he had to have major knee surgery both years, it's like, it is a what if, but he got his opportunity, and ultimately, I don't think Embiid capitalized on it the way that other players have. It really does suck for the 76ers, though. I mean, you just think about this timeline, the process going from this tanking basketball team, the worst in the NBA. You walk into Embiid, you walk into Ben Simmons, and you had it, and you were there, and you were so close, and it feels like, we had a question the other day, Carson. We were talking about who should feel worst about their NBA season. Maybe Philadelphia now. Maybe Philadelphia just took the cake.
Man. They're having a hell of a competition. They are both having the season from hell. Just to sum up the point that I was making about why you can't say that he's the biggest what if ever, he had chances that those other guys never did, and he was not good enough with those chances, and he didn't live up to his own standard. And that is something that I think is being overlooked by a lot of people who I'm seeing talk about Embiid right now. And I mean, totally fair.
We can take the kid gloves off. We don't have to play. You know what I mean? We don't have to. Yeah. We don't have to be gentle.
Yeah, I totally understand people wanting to be positive about his career in this moment because he did so many great things. He was an MVP. He's one of the greatest scoring centers that we've seen.
I'll always remember, he gave us a moment. I'll remember that 50-piece for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that was incredible. And, I really don't hold this past year in the playoffs against him because he was so obviously hobbled. It is kind of crazy that he shot like 20% in fourth quarters, and that was such a concerning trend throughout his playoff career. But I give him mostly a pass for that one because of the conditions that he was playing in. So I get people wanting to be very positive in this moment. I just think you got to be honest, and like you don't want to sanitize things to a point where you're not telling the truth anymore, and you say, oh, this is one of the, I don't know, however many greatest players we've ever seen. Some people will try to stretch it and say 10 or 15 or whatever, and it's like, I guess if you only looked at the regular season, maybe you could make that case, but that's just not the reality of it. He really is one of the biggest playoff droppers, if not the biggest playoff dropper that we've ever seen. I do think it's a miracle, and it's honestly a testament to modern medicine that we got to see Joel Embiid play in the NBA as much as we did, if there is a positive spin to tank on it. Because like you said, I mean, 2 major foot surgeries, back-to-back years before he ever set foot in the league. And then he has all of the knee issues that transpire later in his career. Like those sort of lower body persistent issues for a guy who was 7 foot, nearly 300 pounds at any other point in NBA history, those are career ending very early on. Think about Odin, think about Ralph Sampson, think about all of these massive guys, think about Bill Walton, his feet. And Embiid made it further than those guys ever did. And that's a good thing. And hey, like he might not be done. When you're talking about medical retirement, that's obviously as big a red flag as you can possibly see. I mean, but modern medicine's pretty incredible. I'm certainly not optimistic. I'm also not going to sit here and say 100% that we're never going to see Joel Embiid on the court looking like a star again, because Kawhi keeps coming back, man. Zion keeps coming back.
I don't know. Embiid,
I mean, they don't really stick around for a full year, but they come back and they look good when they're healthy.
They need to take it as slow as possible. I think the Sixers kind of made a mistake pushing it as far as they did this year and trying to keep entertaining something that was just not going to be attainable this year. I think that they probably should have pulled the plug sooner, and I didn't see it. I'm praying for him. I'm hoping that Embiid can make a full recovery and that maybe this operation will be the answer for him. I definitely want to see him back on the court, and I know the Sixers do too. I hope that we can see it again.
Yeah, it really would be such a nightmare for them. All of these factors coming together. The Paul George contract, only paying him so that you could try to make the most of this window you have with Embiid, for Embiid to then suffer like a potentially career-ending injury. And as we've talked about many times over, if they don't land in the top 6, they don't even get their own pick this year. And they had their rising little star and Jared McCain, and then he got hurt. He'll be back. They don't need to be permanently gloomy about that. But really, really, really rough year. Hopefully all of you Sixers fans are also Eagles fans, and you got to enjoy that at the very least. There's another team, Logan, that was impressive over the weekend, a team that has been impressive for the last week plus, who we've been talking about a lot because they're the biggest story in the sport right now. The Los Angeles Lakers just swept in back-to-back games their LA counterpart, the Clippers. Between those two LA teams, presuming health, which is a major caveat here, but I think that's the only way to really make this an interesting question, which LA team is a bigger playoff threat in your eyes?
I would say the Lakers because I trust their stars more. And Luka is just one of the game's great all-time amplifiers, just how he makes everybody that's on the court with him so much better. I mean, the easy three-point looks that he generates, all the defensive attention he commands. The Lakers just make it look so easy, at times. Like, Luka just alleviates so much pressure off of everybody. The level that LeBron's been at, that's where I'll start, right? Like, I just trust their stars more. And their role players have been doing a real phenomenal job recently, knocking down open looks. The defensive effort we've seen from some of these guys. Jared Vanderbilt played out of his mind in these games. Dorian Finney-Smith has been excellent. Yeah, so, I mean, I just think the Lakers have been playing better basketball. But I wouldn't underestimate the Clippers by any means because the Clippers would really scare me in a first-round series. One, I think this team's collective defense, top to bottom, they've just got guys who are tenacious, who play hard, who make life hard on opponents. You can start with Big Zoo. He's been a beast on the interior, taking away the rim. But, if it's Chris Dunn, if it's Ben Simmons, whoever's out there, the Clippers have a really, really good team defense. And offensively, I think they've got a lot of things going for them. Zubats is a matchup nightmare. I mean, if you don't have like a Zubats stopper, the guy just gets whatever he wants. We talked about him last episode, just how he's one of the most underrated guys in basketball. But he's a matchup nightmare, in my opinion. And I think a lot of teams in the Western Conference just don't have a guy that can match up with him one-on-one, where it'll be easy offense every possession. Harden has still got some juice, right? He's not what he once was, but he can still do his thing on a given night and get hot. Norman Powell is an absolute problem. I think you saw the other night, I get that he struggled. He didn't have a great end-to-end performance, but Bogdanovich is a beast and can get hot at certain points in games where he could swing a series, right? They got guys that can light it up and get hot, and he's I like Bogey in big games, man. I just feel like Bogey's got that. I don't know, man. He's got some dog in him that I really like. I feel like he amps himself up for big moments where I trust him to deliver. And I get that it's mythical, man, and I always talk myself, and I go back and forth between it. Kawhi is so damn good when he plays. The handle that Kawhi has, the playmaking that he has, the physicality that he plays with. Kawhi is such a monster when he's available. The Clippers would scare me, Carson. If I'm any team in the Western Conference, I would not want to run into the Clippers because I feel like that is a series I would flag for upset potential. I just would not want to see the Clippers, and I wouldn't count them out. The Lakers, I just think I was a little bit too low on when they made this move. I think the Lakers have just risen to real contender status. And I think the Clippers, Carson, I think I'd have the Lakers above the Nuggets now. I think I've been moved enough by them.
Yeah.
The Clippers are in that hungry contender tier that I just wouldn't want to run into, man. I think the Clippers are very, very scary. I wouldn't want to play either of the damn LA teams, man. Both of them scare me, but I definitely wouldn't want to run into Luka and LeBron and the level that the Lakers have been at recently.
I think that the Lakers certainly look better, not just than the Clippers, but also than the Nuggets right now. And I think that they probably are the second best team in the West because of the seriousness that they've shown defensively. They just have an ability to actually guard that Denver does not, even if Denver locks in more. LA has shown that their personnel is just better, and I just totally underestimated them defensively, and their role guys have been so good there. The only reason that I would hold off on even saying decisively that they're better than Denver is because we've seen 5 games of them actually being serious with Luka. But, I don't really see what would change. I don't see why they'd regress. It's just still a very small sample size at this point, but they've been doing it against good teams now. They're second in defensive rating over this 5-game win streak, and as I've said time and again, that's basically all that you're measuring with this team. Luka's been playing better offensively too these last couple games, but He obviously hasn't been his best overall offensively with the Lakers, but that's fine. I don't care. I know that he's going to get into form. This perimeter defense has been so impressive. Their activity, their aggregate rim protection has really been quite good. Over these last 5 games, the Lakers are top 5 in blocks and they're top 5 in opponent field goal percentage at the rim. I did not think that they would be able to achieve that, but it's the totality of their length and their athleticism more so than it is any one big, because we also see them go small without Jackson Hayes on the floor a good bit. DFS giving great minutes. And Vando, as you mentioned, has been giving really, really good minutes. And I think that this is the best situation that he's ever been in, because you feel like you can go small where you don't have to play him alongside a center and you'll be competitive defensively because you can have him and DFS and Rui and these more bigger wings and defensive minded guys out there. But even in 60 minutes with Vando and Jackson Hayes on the floor, the Lakers have been a plus 24 net team, which is insane. Now, that's a small sample size. I'm not going to bet on that working offensively in the playoffs. I think that teams would not guard Vando whatsoever. And it just creates some spacing issues that you don't want to deal with, but you don't have to deal with it, because when you go small, you can get Vando and DFS out there together, and now you have an awesome defensive pairing, and both those guys are in better offensive situations. So yeah, their defense just looks way better than Denver's right now. And if you get Luka and LeBron at their best offensively with the shooting they have around them, that's a surefire elite offense. There's not really even much to be concerned about from this recent stretch. I will say, Zoo gave them a lot of trouble in that first matchup, and he's averaged 17 and 14 on 66% true shooting against them. The one thing that I would flag, unsurprisingly, with how much they've gone small, is their defensive rebounding. They're 26th in defensive rebounding rate in the last 5 games, and even in the Jokic matchup, where we saw them defend him incredibly well, he had 4 offensive rebounds. I think he could do even more damage than that on the offensive glass. I think if he just put up more shots, he'd have a really good chance at grabbing a lot of his own misses. That's the one thing that I do think they're compromising defensively with just their current roster makeup. They just don't really have the personnel to be a very good defensive rebounding team, but they've covered up for that so well. They're so talented offensively. I do think that they are better than the Clippers, and I did not think that that was the case when they made the trade. I also really liked the Clippers, and I do still think the Clippers are really good. I think it's important to note that they were still very competitive in these 2 games, and they had 9 total minutes of Norman Powell because he had been hurt, and then I think he strained his hamstring again in the game that he came back, which is a bummer. And so that matters, right? That could be worth a few points of difference in these games. But the Clippers offense all year, has been below average. They're 22nd in offensive rating. I thought Kawhi coming back would significantly improve that, and it hasn't by as much as I hoped. Since Kawhi really started playing consistently since January 23rd, from which point he's played 14 of 17 games, they're still just 19th in offensive rating. I do think their offense is better than that, absolutely, because they have been missing Norman Powell some, who has been a flamethrower this year and one of their best offensive players. Kawhi has still just been playing his way into form. He was awesome in the second game against the Lakers, but he'll just be more efficient going forward. Bogey, who I think was a really good ad for them offensively, he's just been very off as a shooter. He's been inefficient. Harden has been in a bit of a slump. He's had some clunkers as of late. So just nobody's really playing well for them offensively. They haven't had all of their guys. They're introducing some new guys. They're trying to find a rhythm. I think that they're going to be certainly better than the 19th offense, but I still think there's a gap between these 2 offenses that exceeds the gap between these 2 defenses. And when the Lakers made the trade, I thought that that would be flipped because I underestimated what I think they can now do defensively. I still think these teams are pretty close, but I think you hit on a really good point. Whose stars do you trust more? I know what I'm getting from Luka and LeBron every night. If Kawhi is healthy, I think I know what I'm getting from him night after night. I don't think that he has been as dynamic as he was last year when he was still a fringe top 5 player when he was on the floor. I think now he's probably more like the 12th best player when he's healthy and good to go. He just does not get to the rim at all. And he still is so strong, and he's still such a great shooter, and he's still a good defender. He still makes a real plus impact in a lot of ways, and particularly as a scorer, I just think is still a killer. but his efficiency probably takes a little bit of a hit with the lack of that downhill pressure. But I mostly know what I'm getting from him. It's James Harden, who, as he has just regressed to the point where he cannot finish around the rim anymore, which we've seen in the last several postseasons. Even though he had some great games last year against Dallas, he also had some brutal shooting games. And this year, the finishing stuff has gotten even worse. James Harden shoots 48% inside of 8 feet this year, Logan. I mean, that is just a truly atrocious number. Putrid. And that just really, really gives you a low floor as a scorer, because that's the most reliable way to consistently produce, and he's the most limited star in the league in terms of finishing at the rim. He has made 1/3 of his field goals or fewer, that's 33% shooting or worse, in 21 of his 57 games this year. And like, again, historically, we've seen against elite athletes, against playoff defenses that are keyed in on him, it becomes even more of an issue for him, the scoring floor being really low. So the playmaking is still great. He's still really tough to deal with on an island. I mean, I know that his 3-point percentage is under 34, but the step back is still a problem. All of that is true, but I just have way too many concerns about his inability to score in the paint. And if he goes cold as a shooter, then, he can give you 6 points on 2 of 13 shooting literally any night. And at that point, he's only relying on his ability to get to the line and his playmaking. So if the Lakers are going to defend well, then yeah, they're the better LA team.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Clippers would have to draw like a really, really favorable matchup in round one, and I don't know if that matchup exists for them.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that it does potentially exist. If I'm any of those teams in the lower range, I'm looking at Memphis and I'm thinking, that's my best shot. That's my best chance.
Especially against LA, I feel like Memphis has a zoo stopper, and at least they've got Edie and Triple J on the inside. Like, that's where if I saw an advantage,
whose offense do you trust more between those teams?
Probably Memphis's.
Really?
It's close.
I don't agree with that. I think with Kawhi and with Norm on the floor, I would take LA's offense.
Maybe. That one's close. I think that's probably the best answer. I really hope.
Yeah, I think I would pick LA to win that series.
I really hope we don't get Houston, Memphis in that 4-5, but that kind of looks like where we're heading.
It does look like where we're heading, which would be a bummer.
That's the funniest. That is the funniest possible outcome.
I just want to see the Clippers or the Warriors
or the
Mavs have a good chance to win a playoff series, because I think that those teams are all better than their record, and I think Houston is not as good as their record because they've played so hard this regular season. And that's not to say the Clippers couldn't beat the Lakers or the Nuggets. I think that they could, but I think that their best chance is Memphis, because Memphis is a flawed offense. Clippers are flawed, but I think that they're a little better when they have all their dudes. And being down Norm really does matter for them, just because their offensive role players who are filling in there are limited. I mean, the Lakers did not guard Chris Dunn, and Chris Dunn's played a lot, and Chris Dunn has done a lot of good stuff. I mean, he's been starting for them most of this year. Awesome defensively, plays really hard, but it's just hard, man, when you aren't guarding a player on the floor and everybody around him is having to play 4-on-5, believe it or not. That makes things pretty hard on an offense. That it does. We're talking about Norman Powell and the impact that his absence has. I want to revisit the conversation surrounding the award that Norm is a frontrunner for, and that's Most Improved Player, because I think we have a really, really interesting race this year. We talked about this at the midseason point, but I wanted to check in. Who is your Most Improved Player right now?
I think I'd still give it to Christian Braun.
He was your choice in the season.
I know Cade's getting a lot of buzz. I've seen Hero getting some buzz. Amen Thompson, Mobley. It's kind of open. I just feel like Braun is the guy who fills the spirit of the award the best. Stepped up into a bigger role this season and has really flourished at doing some things that KCP didn't. I still think KCP is obviously a better shooter and a really good perimeter defender, but Brown's a dog. I mean, he plays super hard on defense. I love him on that end. He's a really good cutter offensively. He's just got really high IQ and really good instincts, and he's been super efficient from the field. And he's taken more threes. He's, I think, improved a little bit as a shooter. Not a lot, but he is more confident in shooting the ball. But he's a really well-rounded impact. And, yeah, I think he embodies the spirit of the award the most. Instead of rewarding any of these really high draft picks that I think you could have seen coming.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. If not him, I might give it to Hero, but I think Hero's kind of been doing this. I feel like he's just had more opportunity to do it this season. Don't get me wrong. He's been better finishing around the rim. He's been a marginally better playmaker, but a lot of his game is still predicated on difficult shot making from the perimeter, which he's been good at. Maybe Dyson Daniels, I think, is an interesting shout with how he's gotten a lot more burn this year. I think he's probably a candidate I prefer more than Hero, but I think I'd give it to Christian Brown right now. I think I'd stick with my pick from the midseason point.
CB is a good pick. He's a good pick, and I saw a tweet from Grace, who's a Nuggets fan. You can follow her on Twitter, although I don't remember her handle, so that's not really helpful. But she's out there, and she had a good tweet using, by the way, 2 shout-outs in one sentence here. Shout out to databaller.com. That's databaller.com. This guy, also a good follow on Twitter, but he made a website which has a bunch of awesome tools. Go check it out right now, Logan. Go check it out. I mean, all sorts of like on-off stuff, with or without you combinations, some really good lineup data. And one of the tools is you can just look at individual players' performances with a teammate of theirs on the floor compared to their performance with that same teammate off the floor, which isn't a totally unique tool, but he presents it in a very nice, aesthetically pleasing way. Christian Brown, in minutes without Jokic on the floor, averages 17.6 points per 75 possessions and has a true shooting percentage over 69. That's better production than I would have expected, because I do think in so many ways he really does feed off of Jokic when you think about all of the cutting and whatnot. Just everybody benefits from playing with Jokic offensively, generally speaking. But he's been able to produce really efficiently with or without him. With his athleticism, he's just emerged as one of the best transition scorers in basketball. His footwork there, his vertical athleticism, his touch, I mean, his finishing is absurd. So he has taken a lot of leaps in areas that are not just him benefiting from playing more minutes with Jokic, even though I think both of those things can be true at once. So, I mean, he's a really good pick. Cade is the odds-on favorite right now. Cade is going to win this award, and I do get it. Like, when you think about how people were talking about him last year, when you think about where Detroit was as a team compared to what he's doing now, averaging 25, 6, and 9 for a team that's going to be in the playoffs. The thing is, for me, I almost feel like people are perhaps a bit too dramatic, or have been a bit too dramatic with Cade on both sides. I think certainly people got way too low on him last year, and I think some people right now are a little bit too high on Cade, just because I see people saying things like he's a fringe top 10 player,
can I
which
ask
he is
you,
not. Please.
Can I ask you a player comp I was thinking about?
Please, yes.
Would you rather have Cade or Garland?
God, it's a really fucking good question, man.
I honestly think I'd rather have Darius Garland. I think Garland's just a better offensive player. I think the advantage
I don't think it's a question.
has are defensively and then rebounding, but I don't think it's offset
100%.
enough. I get his shot can be off sometimes, but I just really trust Garland to manufacture great offense, man. So I would take him.
Garland is ridiculous, bro. Garland is a 42% three-point shooter who literally shoots better than 60% on floaters and is an elite playmaker and maybe the best ball handler in the league and a super quick guard. I don't think it's a question offensively, because also Garland's a way better off-ball player. His catch-and-shoot ability is nuts.
And so that's kind of my point too with this, is like almost I get that Garland took his leap before last year, but like, are we factoring?
No. Garland should be a contender. Because Garland got way better. I mean, the thing with him is he got worse, and then he got way better again. And he had some extenuating circumstances last year.
Yeah, holding that.
Yeah, I think it would be weird. I think it would be kind of weird if he won, just because even though he's definitely way better than he was in like 2022, like the leap that he's taken from 2022 to now isn't like most improved worthy. Maybe the leap from last year you could argue would be, but again, that's after some regression already. So Garland, I think, belongs somewhere in the outskirts of the conversation. I don't think that he can really make that sort of A+ case, but It's a really good question that you just asked me, man. I think that Garland fits in more situations offensively. I think he's a more efficient offensive player. I think he is just a better offensive player. At the same time, you can attack him defensively, which you cannot do with Cade. Cade is a big, strong wing who can hang in there on switches. I was actually thinking about this the other day because, as we've talked about, we're going to rank our top 30 players at some point. I think I have these dudes like within a spot or two of one another. So let me really do a deep dive for that rankings, and then I'll give you a decisive answer. But, I mean, it's super close between the two of them. And I do think that Cade's PR right now is exceptional, and Cade's PR last year was absolute garbage, which is why he's the front runner.
Yeah, I also understand, too, rewarding Cade just because of the Detroit Pistons' overwhelming team success this year. But that's also another component that I don't fully understand because while I do think Cade has gotten better, I think the thing that has changed more than anything else than last year is just that they have more good basketball players around him, which is why the team is a lot better. And so I just don't – I think how much Cade has – I think Cade has improved from last year. I just think the amount that people actually think Cade has improved by – has been a little bit overstated this year because of the dramatic team results.
I think you're cooking. I do think that he's gotten better. I think he's gotten better as a pull-up shooter. I think he's gotten a little better as a playmaker. I think he's been more engaged defensively, but I think a huge, huge part of this is replacing the worst shooting lineups that we've had to watch in the last 15 years with actual professional basketball players who can make shots and are competent offensive players around him. So I agree. Cade's not my favorite for that reason either. I was doing some Amen most improved prop earlier in the year because I do think that he has improved monumentally, but you talked about the top pick thing. I mean, there are two precedents historically for most improved player and two archetypes that are not rewarded, and it's second-year players and it's super high draft picks. The super high draft picks one, we've seen that one weaken a little bit, where like Ja won recently, BI won. We've seen some top picks win, but the second year one has been pretty consistent, and I get it. You do expect to see a leap in year two. So he's a contender, but probably not the favorite. Norman Powell, who I started this whole segment off talking about, I mean, he's up 10 points per game from last year. That's so funny to me, just because I feel like 63% true shooting.
I feel like Norman Powell's always been that guy.
See, like, I mostly agree. Like, I don't think that Norman Powell has improved as much as his opportunity has increased. I do think he's definitely having a career season. I think if you look at his efficiency as an on-ball scorer, like, that is a lot better than last year. But I do think that it's a dose of him improving a bit, but also his opportunity improving a lot. But that's the thing, you know, most improved player, a lot of times it's sort of like balancing those two. Because whenever you get a statistical leap, it's rarely 100% that guy got just in a vacuum this much better. I don't think I'm going to go with any of those guys, though. I think I'm going to go with Ty Jerome. I think that Ty Jerome has the most significant leap. Yeah, man. And again, you could argue opportunity here because Logan, you and I have both.
I think Ty Jerome's always been like this, bruh.
Well, yeah, so maybe that works against his case like it works against Norm's case. And then maybe you just say it's Evan Mobley, who was my midseason pick, because he has gotten way better, but I don't think that he has the raw production jump to win the award. Ty Jerome definitely does, and I do think he's always been undervalued. You listen to some Nerdcess episodes circa 2021, which I probably wouldn't recommend, but yeah, maybe if you find the right episode, we throw out a little bit of Ty Jerome love. But he's been so good this year, and he was not in an NBA rotation last year. And now not only is he a sixth man of the year frontrunner, he's just a starting caliber guard who, like, if he weren't behind the best backcourt in basketball, would probably be starting somewhere. He is such a weapon, dude. 85th percentile pick and roll scorer, 97th percentile spot up scorer, 98th percentile isolation scorer. That combination of on-ball and off-ball efficiency, elite. He gives you 12 points.
He's got size, man.
He's got size. The touch is unbelievable. The shooting is unbelievable. He's a good playmaker. 65% true shooting, plus 13 on-court net rating. Huge positive for the best team in basketball this regular season. And this is crazy, man. You talk about opportunity, like, he's probably still not getting enough for how good he is. He's just, again, in this situation with this loaded backcourt. But per 75 possessions without Donovan Mitchell on the floor, That's more than half of Ty Jerome's total minutes. He averages 26.4 points and 6.1 assists on 67% true shooting. I mean, what the hell, man? And you watch it, and that feels right. He dictates stretches of the game and is just so great as a shot maker.
Well, I mean, think
43% on pull-up threes, 58% for mid-range, 58% on floaters. He's so good offensively, it's ridiculous.
I was just going to say, I mean, you think back to the first quarter of Boston-Cleveland, and I mean, I think he has like 8 points in that.
Yeah.
I mean, he was keeping that offense alive for a little bit in the first quarter.
I mean, he's got 20 plus in three of their last four.
My favorite underrated thing about Ty is because I always thought he was a fantastic decision maker and passer. Like, he never forced the issue, and that's one of my favorite things about Ty. I do think he's developed as a scorer. I don't think Ty was like this when he was in Oklahoma City or Phoenix or Golden State. I legitimately think he's improved as a scorer. My favorite thing about Ty is he's always known how to defend in a team context, and that's one of my favorite things about Virginia players in general that specifically played under Tony Bennett. If there's one thing that you're going to learn while you're at school there, it's how to play defense, it's how to do your job, it's how to be, more importantly, disruptive. And Ty does that. Sam Hauser does that with Boston now. Like, for the most part, if you've got size, Tony Bennett is going to give you knowledge to go along with that, and Ty's always been a plus defender at his position. And I mean, he was given. They weren't able to get the ball on the low block to Al Horford off those switches because of how feisty he was in that game. Like, Ty's a baller, man.
Tatum was giving him work off the switches, though.
Yeah.
Tatum was going through them.
You're going to be able to figure it out. He's
Tatum
not the
was
biggest
locked
guy,
in, bro. Tatum was not tweaking. He was locked in.
There's only two things in this. You're either tweaking, Carson, or you're locked in. And there's really no difference.
No, there's a big difference, but there's no third option.
Sorry, there's a difference, yeah, but there's no
You're
gray
going to want to
area.
issue a correction on that one, pal. Okay, these are Ty Jerome's last 5 games. Mitchell is out against Portland, so he goes off for 25 points with 6 steals. 3 of the last 4 games before that, 20 points on 7 of 12 shooting in 21 minutes, 26 points on 9 of 16 shooting in 22 minutes, 19 points on 7-11 shooting in 19 minutes. He's a weapon.
That's NCAA champion Ty Jerome.
To you, and to me also. Shout out Ty Jerome, nicknamed Milk. So he would be my pick. I think that he would be my pick right now. Now, he does not have a chance in hell at winning this award because he doesn't have the profile. And this is just how the Most Improved Player award has changed in recent years, and it's changed a lot. These are not the sort of guys who used to win the award necessarily. When you're talking about Cade Cunningham winning this year, it used to go to a Don McLean, right? If he was the guy who took a leap. It used to go to all sorts of guys who just sort of became like solid basketball players.
Anderson.
Isaac Austin wins one year. Ryan Anderson, well, that's just a Cal Bears legend. I mean, he did take that leap to superstardom. But the award has changed. Now, if you're not averaging like 25 a night in your leap season, you're probably not going to win it. And that's why I think Cade is going to get it. But shout out Ty Jerome. And shout out Christian Brown. I think those guys, in the traditional sense of the award, in the earlier years of the award, I think that they more fit the bill. Not to say that you were ineligible back in the day if you made a star leap. I mean, like, that's the most valuable thing you can do. It just wasn't an award that necessarily had to go to a guy taking that star leap every year. It could go to all sorts of players, just whoever took the biggest leap that year of any scale, star or really good role player. And it's not really the case anymore.
Well said, bro.
Thanks, man. Thanks, man. It always means a lot when you say nice things to me because it makes my heart feel good. It makes me smile, and that's all.
My mom always said,
podcast.
if you ain't got nothing nice to say, just don't say it.
Is that why I talk so much more than you on these podcasts? You're just sitting there stewing in your rage.
No. Don't take
Is that why I go on all these 12-minute monologues? You're just sitting there the whole time waiting for me to shut up.
I'm trying to practice my active listening skills.
You're a really good active listener, man. You actively listen a lot.
I'm horrible.
Oh, really? Are you not paying attention at all when I'm talking? I wouldn't know.
No, I'm locked in. I'm not
thought you might be tweaking, bro. Okay.
I'm locked in.
All right, bro is an active listener. Thank you to all of you for actively listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, the good news is there's always plenty more Nerd Sesh content. YouTube, all of our full shows, Mostly NBA right now, but we also do NFL stuff. And of course, we do our historical pods and our trivia pods. All sorts of good stuff. You can also find all of our video essays and video breakdowns on our YouTube page. You can also listen to the podcast across all audio platforms. And you can follow us across social media, TikTok and Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at nerd_sesh to see clips from the show, graphics from the show, and all of our short form trivia content. You can also join our Discord if you want to become part of our community there. That link is in our link tree, which is in all of our social media bios. And you can check out our merch, which is also in our link tree and at breakingt.com. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I've been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.